Hey, shalom, everybody. Rabbi Derek here, Beth Messiah Synagogue. We are almost to the end of our Omer count. Today is Omer day 48 out of 49. So it's the second to last day. Day 48 is 6 weeks and 6 days. And just like yesterday, I'm playing a little bit of catch up because I wanted to hit at least something from every chapter of Matthew. Yesterday, we finished with Matthew 23. So today, I want to give you just some little bits from Matthew 24, 25, 26, and 27. And then tomorrow, on the final day of the count of the Omer, we will finish with Matthew 28, the final chapter of Matthew. So let's start here. Matthew 24, starting in verse 36. It says, but about that day and hour, Yeshua speaking, but about that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. And then skip forward a few verses to verse 42. Therefore, be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. So Matthew 24 is a particularly famous chapter because Yeshua is discussing and he's revealing some future details of his return and of the coming of the kingdom. And there are a million books and courses and classes and probably degree programs available to discuss and debate the details of the timing and all of the things that Yeshua says, because although he speaks plainly in some sense, it's still prophecy in that it requires interpretation. And there's a lot of different opinions about it all. So we may not all agree on the timing and the nature of Yeshua's return. And the details of that are way outside of the scope of this devotional anyway. But one thing we can say is that Yeshua promised his return. Right? So we can't wonder or don't need to wonder whether or not it's going to happen. It absolutely is going to happen because he promised it. And Yeshua, the Lord, has never not come through on his promises. It's by his nature. He's truth. But what he's also called us to do, what we all can agree on, is that he's called us to be alert and to be ready. This means we can't let our hope or our walk with the Lord go dormant. And, why would we want to do that anyway? We have limited time this side of eternity, and that time should be and can be fueled by our very real hope in the return of the Messiah. So I hope that's encouraging to you. Boom, Matthew 24. On to 25. Matthew 25, verses 1 and 2. Then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the groom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were prudent. So this is the parable of the 10 virgins. And here we have these, basically a wedding party and waiting for the groom to arrive, where in ancient Jewish tradition, he would have gone to his parents' home to prepare a place for him and his bride-to-be to live once they were married, and didn't always announce exactly when he was coming. He was coming when the work was done. And so it goes on to explain in this parable, Yeshua goes on to explain in this parable, that the 5 foolish ones, the reason they were called foolish is because they didn't prepare in advance to have enough lamp oil. And when they finally needed some and they went to go buy it, the groom came while they were away and they missed out. So Yeshua is continuing on from the last chapter where he implores the faithful to be ready for his return at any time. So he's the groom, of course, in this situation. This reminds me of people, maybe you've been like this yourself, or you've known people who've said things like this. This reminds me of people who plan to make things right with God. You ever talk to somebody who says, oh, well, I'll make things right with God. I'll talk to God. I'll become a believer. I'll start walking right later in life. For now, I just want to do my thing, right? There's this like undisclosed later time. And in the meantime, these folks hope that they don't have to care or think about eternal things. And what Yeshua is saying here is that this is foolishness. And we know that even just practically, because none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. That later time, we may not ever get that opportunity. So planning for the future in a time that we don't have control over is absolute foolishness. So that plan falls apart immediately. But more than that, the notion that we'll get with God later, it shows that a person doesn't understand the gospel at all. Because if they did, they would know that faith in Yeshua isn't just about going to heaven when you die. It's about being transformed and having a new life of freedom, living in the reality of the kingdom right now. Why would we ever want to put that off for later? Why would I want to put that off another minute? Why would I want to stay in slavery to sin in my old nature that's destined to die instead of living new life in Messiah? Why would I want that even for a day? I wouldn't. So the point is, Yeshua is saying, don't wait. Get right with him right now. You can do it. You can do it. Because it's on him. The work is done. All you need to do is come to him in faith. And he wants to give you new life. Boom, Matthew 25. On to 26. Matthew 26, verses 26 through 29. Now, while they were eating, Yeshua took some bread. This is their Passover Seder, Yeshua and his disciples. Yeshua took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." When he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is being poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it with you new in my Father's kingdom." So Yeshua was making it very clear, first of all, that this was the last Passover Seder that he was going to spend with them, that this was the end. They were coming to the end of his earthly ministry. But more than that, Yeshua was taking the classic elements of the Passover Seder, the matzah and the cup, that God gave to us in the Torah. Of course, this has been, hundreds, thousands of years, or 1,000 years probably, from Moses to Yeshua, from the Exodus to Yeshua. And what Yeshua was doing was claiming boldly that these symbols were fulfilled. Too much coffee this morning. They were fulfilled in him. And in fact, not only were they fulfilled in him as some sort of like retrospective, they always pointed to him. The Passover elements were always meant to point and show the people of Israel and the rest of the world how God would ultimately deal with sin through the death of the innocent Messiah. So it's possible, historically speaking, it's possible that early Messianic communities would use the annual Passover rituals more frequently, not just annually, but they would use it more frequently to teach the truth of the gospel. And this is very likely where we came up with the practice of what we call Messiah's table or communion or the Lord's Supper or all the different things that it's called, but to do it more frequently because it was used early on in Messianic communities to teach the gospel. But the fact is, whether we do it annually, just at the Passover, or we do it all the time, or anything in between, the message is the same. We're not replacing the Passover with something new, but rather celebrating that the fulfillment of these symbols that our people have waited for generations has come, right? The payment for our sin has been made and accepted by the Father, and he wants us to draw close to him, to commune with him. That's where the word communion comes from. Boom, 26. Finally, Matthew chapter 27, verse 24. This is Yeshua's trial before Pilate. Now, when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. You yourselves shall see." So this chapter has a lot going on, Matthew 27. It describes Yeshua's trial, quote unquote, and I say that because it was not a proper trial. Today in a proper court, this would be declared a mistrial because he was not found really to be guilty of any of the charges brought before him. But Matthew 27 describes Yeshua's trial, but not only the trial, his crucifixion and all the preparations before that, including his mockery and the crown of thorns and all these horrible things. And it also describes his burial. Obviously, we know that's not the end of the story. But this passage that we just read about Pilate washing his hands of it all, not being able to find Yeshua guilty of anything, it relates back to the concept that we were discussing yesterday about the Passover lamb. Do you remember the 14th of Nisan on the Passover, the lambs were sacrificed, but on the 10th of Nisan, which happened to be the day that Yeshua entered Jerusalem on the donkey, that was the day that God told Israel all that time ago to bring the unblemished lamb into the house, to keep it, to inspect it, to protect it, in order for it to be a worthy Passover sacrifice. So here we have the inspection of Yeshua, right? Coming up on the Passover. Yeshua had come into Jerusalem. He's been questioned and he's been tried Um, but he's been found to be unblemished. They couldn't nail any of his charges against him because he had done no wrong. But here, yeah, like I'm saying, here following his sentencing, Yeshua was found to be without guilt. They couldn't get him on any of the charges. But in another gospel, in Mark's gospel, it's described in chapter 14, and that after all of this, Yeshua was finally asked plainly about being the Son of God. Are you the Son of God? And he confirmed it. He said yes. He said yes. And this, in the eyes of the Jewish authority, was blasphemy, and the reason that they could rightfully have him executed. So this was, how they got him, right? Of course, they were wrong. He wasn't blaspheming. He was and is, in fact, the Lamb of God, the true Messiah, God in the flesh, the Son of God. He was that. It wasn't blasphemy. It was the truth. So they had that wrong. And how interesting is it, even that, back in Matthew, in the passage we just read, or the chapter at least that we just read, we see the Roman guards, after Yeshua died, the ones who mocked him and scourged him and put him up on that tree, after he died, they realized the truth about him. They said, this truly was or is the Son of God. Their eyes were opened to the truth following his death. One day, all Israel will recognize and say the same thing. And we're hopeful for that because God has promised it. And again, he comes through on all of his promises. So it's our goal, in the meantime, as Messianic believers, it's our goal to share the love and the truth of Messiah with Jew and Gentile alike until that day comes. Hey, I hope you're encouraged with all of that. Tomorrow we'll be back for the final day of the counting of the Omer. Tomorrow, of course, is Shabbat. So this evening, I'm going to wish you all an early Shabbat Shalom. I hope to see you for services at Beth Messiah Synagogue tomorrow. We're going to celebrate not only Shabbat, but Shavuot together. And it will be a wonderful time of worship and fellowship. And we hope to see you there. So be encouraged. We'll see you again tomorrow. Shabbat Shalom.